Welcome to the Joanne Avison podcast. Today I'm inspired to talk to you about tensegrity in a somewhat different light to the usual explanations. And it's a concept that I deal with all the time. I've studied for decades. And what I find is that a lot of people struggle to understand the implications of it in the human body. How its importance is really so significant, so high in understanding human motion, human anatomy, human physiology, human form. Now, I'm going to drop into sacred geometry here because it's actually the foundation of tensegrity. And in my world, and in many other worlds, I'm not the only one, it's very clearly key to understanding how the human body self-organizes embryologically and grows into form and actually grows into something that is a resonance field. So one of the big challenges that we face in understanding fascia and the way it forms embryologically is that in our self-organizing process, we're made up of three things: cells, tissue, and the in-between. But that's not just three ingredients that are dropped into the embryological soup that somehow something other than us organizes and animates, because we self-organize. And we've grown up under a spell of, it's 400 years old, so I doubt I'm going to break it today, but I'm going to invite you to consider that the human body is not made of separate parts that are bolted together. As I've said in my book repeatedly, that was first written in 2012 and actually began in 2009, nobody goes into hospital to have their baby's limbs bolted on, their plumbing plumbed, their wiring wired, or anything else that makes human form anything like a machine that's put together or a house that's built. And even though we have inherited maps from our forefathers or structural analysis based on biomechanics or the sum of our parts because they appear like levers when they move, or they're stacked and the pelvis and legs carry the spine as passenger, all of that isn't true. It's a spell that we're under because when our forefathers discovered human anatomy, which was illegal 400 years ago to study. You couldn't study a human cadaver to understand the body. But by the time they had the permission to do that in anatomical study, a story in itself that is in another podcast and in my book, Yoga, Fascia, Anatomy and Movement, Chapter 2, Ancient Wisdom, New Knowledge. They were the forefathers that brought forward what became the Industrial Revolution. Now, much happened during the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries to bring about the Industrial Revolution. But it meant that for them, as brilliant as artificial intelligence is for us and as fascinating as technology is for us, so industry was for them. So the metaphor they used at the highest level of their understanding at the time was mechanics, because they thought the body was made up of parts. They had permission to cut those parts up, analyze them, name them, and provide them with functioning attributes that made them coded according to mechanics, thus the term biomechanics. Great big huge error. I describe it as Descartes' error in my next book. It's huge. It's a spell we've all been bound by for 4 centuries. There is really no question about it. The human body is, as any animal form, any living form, is predicated on geometry, not mechanics. And that geometry includes, but is not limited to, the 5 Platonic volumes as representatives of the 5 regular polyhedrons found throughout nature in animal, vegetable, and mineral form. And those 5 polyhedrons are the tetrahedron, the hexahedron, also known as a cube, the icosahedron, the octahedron, and the dodecahedron. And we're not going to go into those. They are exquisite shapes that can all be found inside a particular pattern or form that's known as Metatron's cube. And this isn't hairy-fairy woo-woo shit. This is the 5 regular polyhedral shapes found in nature. And there's masses of history behind this. And the person in our history that knew this, that worked with this, was Leonardo da Vinci, one of my heroes. We'll tell more stories about this another time because we're not going down that road. We're sticking with the icosahedron. Why? Because the icosahedron is the middle one of the 5 regular polyhedrons in nature, in all natural forms, and we are a natural form. And that particular polyhedron represents the element of water because it is the nearest of the 5 regular polyhedrons to represent a round thing, i.e., a globule of water. But there's much more to it than that. Now, bearing in mind, some of you are listening to this as a podcast, and some of you may be watching it on YouTube. So hop over to YouTube, Joanne.Avison, and I'm going to use some models so you'll be able to see them. But I'm going to do my best to describe this for those of you that are listening so that you don't need to see it. So to repeat what I just said, there were 5 regular polyhedral shapes in nature, in all forms of nature. Now, you will have heard in other podcasts me talk about the fact that when the human body was described as a biomechanical form by our revered forefathers, God bless them, they redefined the meaning of the word nature around the same time. So not only did they reduce the human body to its component parts, but they were also obliged to separate the being from the body and extrapolated that the body was formed out of parts that could be bolted together like a machine. The fact that it can be bolted together like a machine or behave like a machine doesn't mean it is a machine, to quote Jaap van der Waal in private correspondence to me. It is incredible to me that nature was redefined as other than man-made at that time. I don't know about you, but I was man-made. The man who called himself my father and the woman that called herself my mother made me. No one else was required from what I gather, apart from me animating myself into form and becoming me in the round. Key, in the round. So, round things. So the icosahedron has something of a hexagonal behavior in cross-section, which can be seen when you look at a hexagon as 5 triangles. Now, interestingly, 5 is the archetypal number of life. Think about it. Seed, tree, flower, fruit, seed. They contain each other. They're in a continuum. And then the seed becomes the next tree, which blossoms the next flowers, which become the fruits, which become the seeds. So deep to the 2-dimensional version of the 3-dimensional icosahedron is the hexagon. Notice it's the pattern of a beehive, formed by a bee's body moving through the wax. And all those bee bodies moving through that wax form the tessellated pattern of a hexagonal structure, which is organized in 3D. Now, we go up another dimension because we move through ourselves. Please don't claim the science that time is the fourth dimension. That's ridiculous. Time doesn't have dimension by definition. Time is the medium of dimension. Space is the medium of dimension. Space-time is the medium in which dimension occurs. The fourth dimension is something that moves through itself, and the human embryo moves through itself to bring itself into form. Something that Leonardo da Vinci could not only see in his consciousness, but managed to draw. And I've had the inimitable task, side teach, of asking a designer, graphic designer, to draw me some of the complex icosahedral geometries that Leonardo da Vinci drew in his book, Divine Proportion. It can't be done with a computer yet. I don't know if that's been achieved now, but it's very, very difficult. What Leonardo da Vinci could see in his consciousness and managed to draw is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. So it's extremely difficult for us to see this, but we know as forming embryos that we invaginate, we fold ourselves through ourselves to bring ourselves into form as a form that is a toroid. A toroid is a four-dimensional shape. It's basically a donut. But if you think about it, a donut is a tube made out of a tube. And we start getting into very complex forms such as Klein bottles, which are multi-dimensional versions of a Mobius loop. Just trust me, you can go and search all this afterwards, but this is what's so. And all of those shapes are built into our form. Our whole energy field is toroidal. But the toroidal matrix is the foundation of, for example, just one of many hundreds in the body, the cruciate ligament. The cruciate ligament is not cruciate ligaments anterior and posterior. It is a toroid that is spiraled in the middle that forms a cup above and below. And the twisty bit in the middle, where it twists, forms the upper cup and the lower cup. It has to be cut in half to form an anterior and a posterior, but it appears as a cross in 2 dimensions. Our problem when we talk about the body is that we've reduced it down in the age of reasoning to the 2D format of left brain reasoning, down into its stereotypical forms. We've reduced everything to iconic images in the anatomy book that basically show us the map as if it's the territory. And it isn't. It's the map. It's a very useful map. But we've started to name things for their location in the body and then get in a pickle when someone's body doesn't have those things in that location. When in fact, in multi-dimension, and you are multi-dimensional, and it's extremely difficult to see because we can't see in more than 2.5. Just saying, scientific fact. That we end up like in no man's land. Now, in our attempts to get to no man's land, one of the things that happened in our history was that Kenneth Snelson, who was a student of Buckminster Fuller, created a sculpture called the X. And that sculpture, absolutely exquisite, was based on his understanding of weaving. He calls weaving the mother of tensegrity. And his understanding of weaving with threads crisscrossed in opposite directions, they can be vertical and horizontal, but they can also be diagonal, activate a form that becomes possible, such as a kite, and then can be extended into the next dimension, which is what he demonstrated with his X model. And I had the great privilege of speaking to Kenneth Snelson before he passed away at his studio in New York. And it was one of the moments in my life that I will remember till I die. It was exquisite for many, many reasons. But for the purpose of this podcast, I want to share with you, he said to me, be very careful how you go down this route of describing this structure, this what we call tensegrity. Because what you're talking about are how structures are suspended within structures. Compression suspended within a sea of tension. Both are tensegrities. Now that's great, big, huge. And I'm going to say it again so that you get it. You won't get it. Don't try and understand it. I'll get you there. He said tensegrities are formed of compression aspects suspended in a sea of tension aspects or tensional aspects. They're both tensegrities. Why is this so significant? Well, I'll get you there. Let me give you the next part of the story. Kenneth Snelson was one of Buckminster Fuller's students, the architect, the brilliant architect who came up with geodesic domes. He understood geodesic patterns. He understood hexagons. He understood icosahedrons. His work is beyond belief. I have his books, and I read a half a paragraph, and it takes me a month to disseminate and get it, and then end up amazed, because you could write a book on every paragraph. Buckminster Fuller named Kenneth Snelson's architecture, his Tensegrity, as I think you call it a portmanteau of two words, tensional integrity. So it became Tensegrity, because he was referring to the compression aspect in the sea of tension, which explains how forces move through round forms. I'll say that again. It explains how forces are distributed through round forms. And when we study it at any depth, we discover why nature would use that to bind water so it can walk around in living forms. It's how round things self-organize. Whether that round thing is an apple, whether it's the cells in a leek, whether it's a flower and its round face, whether it's you or me, whether it's an aardvark or an ant or a bee or the liquid crystal matrix of the honey that it produces, the architecture of the hive, the child that you give birth to. And ask any mother. Babies are round, and they get rounder before you give birth, and then you have to squeeze them out, and they're round. Even if you don't get to do that yourself, you know it's round just through carrying it around, surrounded by you. So just to reinforce the idea of round things, what Buckminster Fuller understood was how the architecture of a geodesic dome was such a brilliant innovation in his day. He did many more things than that, but let's just make this point. And the power of those geodesic domes, when translated into architectures, consider Kenneth Snelson's Needle Tower, for example, demonstrate how something can architecturally hold itself up and economically animate forces through the form. Now, why is it so important that I'm emphasizing animate forces through the form? Animate because we're living architectures. Forces because we are force transmission architectures, moving gravity and responding in ground reaction force through our form. And because our form is made up of round things, round cells in round tubes, integrating tubes, pockets, and pouches, all under the force transmission laws of tensegral icosahedral architectures, because that's the aspect of geometry, not the only one, but the aspect of geometry that we incorporate. Corpus means body, so we incorporate that as a form. And we do that in the golden ratio. Every part of the human body can be described relative to the golden ratio, even to the extent that the faces that we consider the most attractive usually conform quite highly or at high frequency to the golden ratio. The length of your hand to the length of your whole forearm and hand together, and the length from your wrist to your elbow is a golden mean. That geometry is so deep to our bodies and our forms and the resonance fields that we form as energy bodies. That's what we all are. Biomechanics is the wrong metaphor. I've said it 1,000 times. There is nothing mechanical about a living form. Whether it's a lettuce, a ladybird, or any being, any living being. It's living, it's animated, and it's an integrated force transmission system that abides by the laws of sacred geometry, period. And I'm not talking turning pretty pictures of flowers into their two-dimensional patterns, although that's also part of this. That's not all there is to it. It's great big huge. It's how we transmit forces through the fascial matrix of us, which is designed in its most crystallized form in us as a weave. The most crystallized form in us is our bones. The least crystallized, apparently, form in us might be our saliva. Or the superficial fascia, as we call it, that is like egg white, that allows the skin to glide on the tissues underneath it, or that allows one myofascial continuity to glide on another. Now, why am I so adamant about this? Well, one of the things that set me off is that recently I saw somebody on Instagram describing a Tensegrity Icosahedron model, that the hard compressive parts were the bones and the soft elastic parts were the bands that represent the tendons and the fascia and the muscles. That is complete and utter nonsense. It is just nonsense. It's not true, and it will mislead you into a hybrid version of understanding how Tensegrity actually makes sense of us and senses us, and we make sense of it in living architecture. Every single aspect of you, every cell, and you've got 70 trillion of the things, are Tensegrities. Some bind in particularly close form, regular, close packed form, with additional chemistry such as hydroxyapatite to form bone. But your bone is a Tensegrity architecture. Every fiber of you is formed in a weave of spiraling threads that are organized in the similar patterns of weave, the mother of Tensegrity, or Tensegrity is the mother of weave, whichever way round you want it. They are also soft matter versions of the hardened bone. They just have different content. So cartilage, for example, has hyaline in it. That weaves the Tensegrity in a different way. Myofascia has muscle protein in it, which weaves the Tensegrity in a different way. When you unite these Tensegrities in the form called the human body, which it did already by itself, by the way, you didn't have to go to school to learn how to do this any more than an acorn went to school to learn how to become an oak tree. You already are all this, and the fluid inside you, perhaps with the exception of urine, is not liquid, it's bound water, bound with collagen. There's collagen in your bones. There's collagen in your fascia, everywhere. And your fascia isn't just what's named as fascia in the anatomy books, classically considered a dissectable sheet or sheath. Please, wake up. This is a living architecture, and we are made of all of it, and all of us is made of it. And it expresses itself in multiple ways. It is a force transmission system, not an example of different forms put together retrospectively with an elastic band holding it in place. For goodness sake. And the other thing I've seen on Instagram is somebody explaining that we have a balance of elastin and collagen in our fibers so that we can be bouncy. That's crap as well. It's absolute nonsense. You're not made of elastic bands. You are made of a fascial matrix that is intelligent enough to respond to force. So if you sit around in a slump all day, it will become a slumpy architecture. And if you strengthen it like mad, it will get to a point of dysfunctional strength as an architecture. And because it responds, it's responsive, it's living. If you are born with a predisposition to being a soft version of this, then there's one way to treat you. And if you are born with a predisposition to being a much firmer or more fixed version of this expression, then there's ways of training so that you can soften it a little. And everyone is unique. But please don't run away with the idea that any part of your body is a part of a tensegrity architecture. Now, I know a lot of you talk about biotensegrity as if that's been discovered recently. What that is, biotensegrity is the name that Dr. Stephen Levin brought into more common parlance through his work as a spinal surgeon. He's as misquoted as everybody else. However, biotensegrity doesn't replace tensegrity. He simply took it in the same way that mechanics was taken to biomechanics. Dr. Levin brought biotensegrity so that it was applied to the human form. His work is extrapolated and misunderstood as much as anyone else's. Donald Ingber took the understanding of tensegrity and studied extremely carefully under microscopic conditions and wrote the most amazing article in 1998 in the Scientific American about how important this principle is to understanding cellular activity. Now, I've said in a previous podcast, we're made of cells, tissues, and the in-between. All of that is bound by the tensegral laws of nature because we are mostly bound water. And the icosahedron is the shape amongst the 5 platonic volumes that most closely resembles water. And we now know from Gerald Pollack's work, which is preceded by Mae-Wan Ho's work, that bound water behaves in certain ways under different conditions. The patterns that it makes are nevertheless icosahedral. They are more bound when they're what's called highly tensioned and more organized, H3O2 technically. And when they are released through the various stories of the electromagnetic field, I'm not going there now, but I want you to understand that they move more freely and they become H2O, that we're more commonly aware of as water. But it does have more than one phase. And even within its phases, it is still in motion. We are the walking example of that. Stop reducing your understanding of tensegrity down into the reductionist model, or one up from the reductionist model that we inherited from our forefathers. Descartes' error and, God bless him, Borelli's blunder are important things to understand. Not because they explain human motion, but for the reasons that they do not. We are not mechanical. Period. We are made up of geometry, and that geometry is sacred because every being on this planet is sacred. We may have forgotten. We may not find it very trendy to describe that. And I am telling you that every single one of us is a being of light and sound. They are transmitted by the tensegral organization of the human body. We are soft matter physics, and we've been under the spell of a hard matter physics series of definitions for 4 centuries. And I just can't stand it. I'm breaking the spell hereby. Laugh if you want. Challenge me if you want. But first check out Buckminster Fuller in terms of architecture, Donald Ingber in terms of understanding how this works on a cellular basis. And think about this. We are multicellular forms, 70 trillion cells. If you think of a cell as a second, 70 trillion adds up to about 30 million years. So there's no way we can even figure our bodies out. I mean, seriously. We're an inner cosmos. We're in interface with the cosmos. And the work of people in anatomy, such as John Sharkey and John Godman 200 odd years before him, and Andrew Taylor still since, in between. I'm just being passionate. Forgive me if I've got things in, not saying it all in perfect order. All of these people are demonstrating to us that there is far more to our understanding than the anatomical sum of our biomechanical parts. Now, I've just done a workshop in which a lot of people came to me and said, well, do you understand anatomy trains? And the answer to that is yes. I cut my anatomical teeth on anatomy trains. I did the first human dissection. I had access to the second one on that, understanding those bands in the body. And they are a great idea and a great step towards wholeness, but they fall short. Why? Number one, the anatomy trains was a metaphor, as Tom Myers is the first to say. It was a metaphor. And that metaphor was a great idea to get us from bits to bands. It's a metaphor. In the dissection laboratory, there are very good researched pieces of work that demonstrate the so-called superficial back line is a powerful band. It is never divorced from the superficial front line in the human form, which I challenge the definition of the superficial front line and have good reason to do so. And I challenged it with Tom Myers when it was first brought into the lab. Why? Because that book was written prior to any laboratory investigation, number one. Number two, it is an absolutely brilliant way to get us from bits to bands. However, it doesn't get us from bands to bodies. The body's not made of separate slings. Nothing in the human body is separate from anything else. And it absolutely works as a stepping stone towards bands to bodies and bodies to beings. Like everything else in nature, a living body animates the architecture of sacred geometry. That's what's true. We are whole and complete at all times. This isn't religious, this isn't spiritual necessarily. It might resonate with certain spiritual beliefs, but neither of those are my purpose. My purpose here is to absolutely underline to you, you are made of soft matter, not hard matter. You've been under a hard matter spell of biomechanical functions and form for 400 years. And you have to include and expand and transcend that and get to the idea that you are living geometry walking around as expressions of all the sacred geometry in Metatron's cube. Keystone one, the Tensegrity Icosahedron. Well, it's the icosahedron because that's the fluid matrix, but tensegrity is the word that Buckminster Fuller came up with to describe how that animates form. And in conversation with John Sharkey, we came up with the term fascia-tegrity, not to challenge anyone else's terms, but simply to bring home the idea that the fascia only operates in terms of tensegrity. It can't form in any other way. Why? Because it's woven, because it's under tension absolutely everywhere in the body due to how the embryo forms itself, and because it is in a range of hardness to softness, fluid to more fixed architecture of the crystalline bone, for example, that can animate and activate and change constantly under the forces put through it. Elastin is a genius option within the body, particularly brought into it in wound healing. Your fascia matrix is the most intelligent and exquisitely profound governor of our energy in motion, our emotion. And very few of us give ourselves permission to let that dance. Mostly we try and reduce our form and our function to theories and formulas that allow us to know how best to move, what best to eat, what best to do, and when to do it. And there's much more for us to find within ourselves when we integrate and understand this exquisite dance of nature that we are within our consciousness, as our consciousness expressing itself through our form. I think consciousness is sacred. I think human being is sacred. Hu is the Sanskrit word for divine. So humankind is divine man, divine proportion, divine organization. But trust me, it's all one. And it's all one architecture. Tensegrity is a word for it. Fascia-tegrity is a word for it. We might find a better one. But I just beg you not to reduce the Tensegrity icosahedron. This model, I'm just showing it at the end, is not necessarily made of elastic and hard stuff in the human body. And this doesn't represent bone and this doesn't represent fascia. It all represents fascia, tendon, muscle, bone, soft tissue, hard tissue. It's all tensegral in nature with varying degrees of hardness within its soft matter. Bone self-organizes. So does skin. It all tells the story of our time in the body. And please, please forget the idea that the hard bits represent these hard bits and the soft bits represent these soft bits. No, it's all made of a fluid matrix in varying degrees of hydration. And within the cell is a tensegral architecture between the microfilaments and the microtubules. The cellular architecture is also a resonance field that responds. You are animating and activating and organizing millions of subtle responses communicating in light and sound throughout your form that makes the internet look like something old-fashioned. It's a liquid crystal matrix. You actually form far more on the principles of the screen on your phone or tablet or computer than ever you do anything mechanical. And we're only beginning to have the language to describe it now that we all know what a network is. And we know what the word interface means. Borelli and Descartes probably didn't use those words. I don't know, but I may be wrong about that. But you get my drift. We are bioemotional intelligence walking around. And trust me, the design is based in the same sacred geometry that designs every flower, every tree, every animal, every form, every living form, every crystal on this planet. It's not nearly as mysterious as it might seem. But please don't reduce it back down to its component parts as if we are less than, way beyond anything we understand. We are all amazing. We're all divine children animating our way into form and reconnecting with what we were already connected with. Well, I think we already are, but that's another thing. We're blessings. I think we forget that sometimes. And I'm going to finish with Berush Beshan, which means the blessings already are. Take care. Forgive the passion. And God bless you.